So I want to start off by saying I'm new to this place and this is my first story, so please bear with me. This story I'm about to share is actually why I joined this community, to find out what happened to me and others. This is 100% true, and it's hard for me to share because when I try to tell someone else about it, I get laughed at and accused of trying to pull their leg. I recently came across an article about a female hunter and a creature in an invisible suit that described her as the same predator from the movie. I read his story and saw the picture he took of the predator, and as for his picture, I think it's sunburn, and his face is covered up or something. I'm not denying his story, in fact quite the opposite, because I encountered something similar, and it made me look for someone who met a predator in the woods. Here's what happened. I'm about 5 years old. I used to play on the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I often played there, and my grandmother watched me from the kitchen, the living room, or the bedroom, because the house had large windows overlooking the forest. He kept coming out to see what I was doing. At that time, I was busy digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrows that littered the area where my grandmother lived. It should be noted that this is Midwestern Illinois, not far from the high elevations there, so it's not uncommon to find owl heads. Anyway, I remember choosing a place to dig that day. I stayed there for a long time because I remember something peeking into the tree next to me, and there was a pretty good-sized hole. I hardly know how to explain it. It was like a wave of heat emanating from the branches of a tree. It was autumn, and I remember it because I had my jacket on, and I remember thinking my mother was going to be mad because I had dirt on the bottom of my digging hands. I also remember that there were lots of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I look at this heat wave and realize that it has a slightly human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, wondering why there is an invisible man in a tree. I was scared, but I didn't know what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint kind of sound. At this point, I decided I shouldn't see it and took it home. My grandmother saw that I was very shaken, and I told her that I had just seen an angel. I don't know what else was going on in my 5-year-old mind. I had never heard of aliens, ghosts, or monsters, so it must have been an angel to me, because that's my little mind. Anyway, fast forward to when I was about 12 years old. At this point, the meeting was out of my mind. I loved watching action movies and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator, and I watch it with him, and the first time you see a predator or something invisible, man, I soiled my pants. All the memories he had dug up in the dirt since that day came flooding back. I even asked my father if the predator was real, or if he knew of some animal with hidden abilities that he didn't know about. He told me it was all a lie. It wasn't like today. I just had to Google it. I didn't have access to the internet, so I put it out of my mind. Around 2004. I'm now grown and have 3 small children. I went through a divorce and moved to an apartment in the next town over with my kids. These apartments are all one-level duplexes with 5 buildings. I'm in the last apartment of the last building. Apartments are considered in the city, but outside. Behind the buildings is a deep pit with a chain-link fence separating the yard from the pit. There are probably about 6 or 7 trees on the side of the fence. If you follow the ridge for a bit, you hit a small forest, which eventually leads to a larger forest and farmland. A year ago, I was on an app, a local app where you can talk to people in your area. I met a nice girl there and we had common interests. We hit it off right away and exchanged numbers and pictures. Everything was fine, a little too perfect actually. He was all over me, saying things like, "You're a gentleman, I think, but he's obsessed with me. I've never had a girlfriend like that before." Even though she wasn't the best-looking girl, she made me feel a certain way. Then at some point we wanted to meet up, usually on a Saturday afternoon, and have a good time. After that we went to him and did the work and had a good time. At this point I tried to sleep at his house, but he didn't want me. I think she lost interest because of my poor performance, but she couldn't be bothered at that point, and went on with my day and left the house. No, he didn't lose interest at all. He asked me if I arrived well when he got home, maybe 30 minutes later. After that, nothing really happened, just the usual text messages about life and stuff. 2 weeks later, after I graduated, I wanted to see him again, but something was different. His way of writing is unemotional and direct. When I texted him, he responded almost immediately, which was different because he always took his time. That's how I knew it, and I wanted to be with him on my way. and it didn't matter that much. But at this point, it was like someone else was behind the cell phone. I didn't think about it, and said I would take her to her house in my car. But no, he said I would meet him at the park because he had to get gas anyway. The place we were supposed to meet was a local park, but he wanted to meet when it was dark, which was obviously a bit suspicious. But it all seemed a bit normal to me at the time. But when I told them why they were everywhere, he told me not to ask dumb questions and be on time. I replied lol okay when I was there, and waiting for him he came after 10 minutes, but I didn't mind, to be honest. I was just happy to see him again. He stopped his car, and for some reason I felt really weird. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I checked the location, looked left and right for anything, and checked the bushes, but there was no one attacking me or anything. He also didn't come out for the next 2 or 3 minutes, and I was like, yeah, it's a little weird. I couldn't get into his car because the windows were tinted, so I couldn't see through the windows, and I was 30 meters away from him. I waited for him to get out of his car, but he never did. I was smiling, probably out of excitement, and thought he was just kidding me. But then, suddenly, I get a call. I pull out my phone, and it was hers. As soon as I pulled out my phone and saw his name, I heard the doors open, but not one, but 2, maybe more. The way the car was parked was horizontal, so you couldn't see if there were more passengers opening the door at that time. So I smoke quite a bit myself, but I don't smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often go out on the back porch. One night I stayed up late doing laundry and doing things after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before bed. I went back to the porch and started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately look at the pit because I saw some dirt there a few days ago, and I thought maybe it was there again. The yard is dimly lit by an outside light just to the right of my back porch. I didn't light the porch light. I didn't usually do that, just in case I went out for a quick smoke. I don't see any land or movement from the pit, so I go back to smoking. The faint clicking sound, however, continues, and a slight movement makes me look at the tree to the left of the entrance. And there it is, the same invisible thing I saw all those years ago. It was deformed and humanoid in shape. He climbed up the trunk of the tree with his hand on a branch. To be honest, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was like, is this really true? Did he come to kill me from seeing me all those years ago? My kids were sleeping in my apartment, so I ran in and locked the door. I ran into the children's rooms and made sure all the windows were locked. Then I turned off the lights in the room and looked through the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for about 10 minutes and could not see anything. I thought maybe I was tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. And finally, when I'm talking to myself, my neighbor's dog runs into the yard and starts barking at the tree on that branch where he saw that predator. This surprised me because this dog was never a barker. I've never really heard him scream at anything, not even on the ground hanging in the pit. This barking went on for a few minutes before I heard the dog's owner call her back. The dog reluctantly turned to head home, stopping a few feet away and looking back at the branches of the tree. I didn't sleep that night, and I never saw anything like it again. I really don't know what to think about it. I'm now an adult. I have children and a good career. I wonder if anyone else has had this experience. I know what I've seen, believe it or not. If you're sitting here and listening to this, thank you for listening to me. Hopefully one day I'll get some answers. But the way things are going, I'm not really optimistic. So this incident happened a few days ago. I work in a bar and usually get home between 12.30 and 1.30. In the warmer months, I will usually use a bicycle or an electric scooter, and tonight I was on a scooter. At this point, I was a few minutes away from home, but I heard my phone go off in my bag a few times, so I decided to stop for a moment and pretend it wasn't important. I realize it's not the greatest decision, but I don't usually get these kind of messages at night. Pull up the sidewalk next to the slippery entrance to the plaza flanked by 2 bushes, with a stone fence on the left. Oh, I think are more plants though. I would have been about 15 or 20 feet to the left at that point, and as I stopped to pull out my phone, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was a tall, thin man who was hiding in the bushes to the left of the entrance. He looked at me. He said what I couldn't say and started walking towards me. so I immediately got on the scooter and drove back to the car. I never stop and talk to people at this time of night, but someone hiding in the bushes at 1 a.m. is definitely not someone I want to work with. Unfortunately, this kind of thing happens a lot here, but this case was definitely one of the most intense I've ever experienced. I definitely realize that you can't stop when it's so close to home. I guess the lesson here is don't make the same mistake I did. Always be alert when you go out at night, especially alone, because you never know who might be lurking in the bushes waiting for the right moment. All I knew was my body immediately went into fight or flight mode, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I ran for my life and didn't turn my back on who or what got out of the car at this point. When I got away, I deleted and blocked his number. To this day, she probably cheated on her boyfriend, and she somehow found out and wanted to beat me up or seriously hurt me or something. I heard all the stories and news stories about how people get beaten up because of a cheating husband or wife, and I didn't want to be another statistic. To be honest, I don't believe he was in the car. Maybe 2+ dudes who want to hurt me. I was actually surprised that I could run so fast. Maybe because of the adrenaline, I think. But yeah, I can't say for sure if it was scripted or if there was something more to it. Anyway, when I got out, I was happy with it. So it takes me, a 23-year-old woman, 4.5 hours to get home from my family. With 2 hours left, my gas tank is half full, so I'm constantly stopping to get gas at a parking lot. This time, I really had to use the bathroom, so I just wanted to pull up to the first pump I saw, pump gas, go to the bathroom and be on my way. When I pulled up, there was a car at the pump and a man was getting gas. Now he looked back at me and I never minded because it's normal, to be honest. I do the same thing when a car is pulled over. But here's the thing, insert my card, open the gas cap, etc. As I was doing my work, I saw him still staring at me through my peripheral vision. When I looked, he was looking away. My parents always told me to be aware of my surroundings when I get gas, so I'm a bit used to going left, right, forward, and backward. The man was still watching me, so at this point, I'm going to look back on it. Her son, who looks just like me, gets out of the car, whispers something in her ear, and switches seats with her. Now this man walks towards me, but throws his body against the passenger side of my car and approaches to watch as he passes. Very good, I think. He's trying to steal me now. Well, good luck because my door is locked. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for this advice. He was driving very close to my car as he looked at me, paused for a second, then quickly entered the store. He would say, it looked like he wanted to say something, but I was more focused on finishing the pump so I could do my job and leave quickly. They kept me and the animal on the passenger side of the driver. When I caught him, I noticed the pump attendant, who was never out of the ordinary, standing next to the garbage. I said, "Hey, I'm just going for a second, but I'm going out." He smiled and told me not to worry. Now you're probably thinking, why didn't you go somewhere else? 1. I am not usually afraid of men. 2. I deliberately drew the attention of the pump attendant that I was traveling alone as a woman. 3. I really had to use the bathroom, didn't I? Cut me some slack if you don't think the male species is going to make me focus on my needs. 4. In all seriousness, as a woman, I'm used to looking at men and being a little creepy at times. I know what I can do, and it really didn't seem out of place. So when I walk into the store, I see her heading towards the men's room. I took a little longer to cool down than he did so I wouldn't run into him. I had a good talk with the lady and her child. After a bathroom break, I grabbed a drink from the fridge, and this man came up to me to drink. I quickly turned away. I thought he had left at this point and realized he was waiting for me. I poked it a few more times, and it finally went away. I paid and left after the man was in the car. But when I got to the car door, my heart skipped a beat. The paper hit the handle and my mind went straight to human trafficking because I remembered a girl who had a story about how she found a paper in her hand, and it hurt her when she took it away. I thought it had finally gotten to that point for me. My first thought was to rush in and arrest the servant. Why didn't I just get in the car and leave? Because the man's car was still parked in front of me. I didn't want him to follow me, maybe make me look like an accident, make me be alone with him, because the highway was empty today, at least until you wait for the police to show up. but I saw that the pump attendant standing on the other side was now in the garbage can next to my car. He handed me some napkins and I took out the paper. When I did, the man and his son left when I left. So I went to the Catholic school I grew up in because it was the best education in my small town. So having sisters and priests as teachers, I was never a fan of either of them because I didn't grow up super religious. I had to work at this school. But that all changed after talking to one of the priests at the school. So my school had an exchange program with another Catholic school in California. So every year a couple of kids and a priest or sister would come down in each class, and we would have new people at our school. In my freshman year, we had a priest who I call Father V. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, who taught English and religion. Big guy, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and a strong stock. He grew up on a farm in Oregon, always causing trouble as a kid, always getting in trouble at school, drinking and smoking as a kid, doing what kids in small towns did back then. But he was honestly one of the nicest people I've ever met. Super eccentric, he never looked crazy and always had a big smile on his face. But of course, there is no one type of guy. He would play with rocks and make leather during class, and always made time after class or school to help with the paper. My friends and I always asked for his help because he was very sharp, especially in English. He spent several hours with her after school, which began as a helping hand, then drifted into discussions and stories about life. After graduating high school, he actually joined a group, which he says was more gangs, and started getting in trouble with the law and whatnot. A few years later, he was imprisoned, stabbed, and nearly bled to death, asking God to dedicate his life to him if he lived. So he did, joining the clergy the day he was released from prison. They took him through schools all over the world. They said he met a lot of cool people and a lot of weird people. And one day after class, my friend and I didn't do anything, so we waited for our parents, a few hours after school. So we decided to go into Father V's room and pick his brain. Now somewhere in the conversation, we somehow got into the subject of God. Not hard on the priest, I know, but because we were squeamish teenagers trying to get a hold of him, we asked God for proof. He gave us the Bible, Jesus, through the disciples, all the typical mumbo-jumbo. But we told him yes, whatever. But then he got serious like I've never seen him before. His eyes are sharp, and there was no smile. He told us with a straight face, you know, if you believe in God, then you believe in the devil, right? We laughed. He couldn't. It confused us. So we asked him what he meant. So clear and confident, it lifted my entire body. He said the devil is real and I have seen him. We immediately asked him what he had to say. So he said that when he was still a young priest and returned to the United States, he worked with an older priest in a small town in Cali. One day they got a call from the local sheriff to help with a family problem. The sheriff told them over the phone that the family's 5-year-old daughter was apparently dead. Father Five said that when they arrived at the house, the sheriff and the girl's parents were kneeling in front of the house and praying. He then said they could hear a noise coming from inside the house, which he could only describe as a cat's voice, but in a deeper hole. He said he had never heard anything like it before or since. As soon as I entered the house, the noise stopped immediately. Not knowing what they were in for, they started walking towards the little girl's room when the power in the house went out. After tripping the breakers a few times, it didn't work either. They had flashlights with them. When they reached his room, they could not find the door. It wasn't locked, but there was something blocking the door. It was later learned that the girl had somehow torn off her wardrobe, which was nailed to the wall, and placed it in front of the door. During this time, she said that a deep male voice could be heard coming from the room, almost like a witch, but really deep. They managed to knock over the wardrobe with it, the other priest and the sheriff all kicking him in the shoulder and the door several times. When they got in, the room had no windows, so it was pitch black. As they entered, he heard a thud across the floor and then up the wall. They shined their lanterns on the wall to see a little girl in the upper corner of the ceiling, with completely black eyes and the ugliest smile he had ever seen. All 3 men left the room and closed the door. A girl with a male voice begins to cry with laughter and repeats, "I want to play." The men gathered, began reciting a poem, and re-entered the room. It didn't seem to affect the girl in the slightest, but she turned up in the upper corner of the room and laughed louder than the men. This went on for several minutes, apparently, before the senior priest stopped reciting a verse, looked at the girl, and in the name of Jesus commanded the spirit to depart. The girl fell to the floor and began to scream as if the animal had been thrown into the fire. The man grabbed the girl and placed her on the bed and held her as the old priest recited more verses while foaming at the mouth. It seemed to work for a while before the high priest tried to sprinkle holy water on him. Father Feeves said the water just evaporated when it touched his skin. He howled like a dog and dropped the sheriff as if nothing had happened, and stabbed V across the stomach. Then the girl began to speak Latin and address all men by her father's name, John's former son. According to Father Fiv, the only thing that saved them was that the senior priest knew Latin. He began to scream at the girl in Latin, demanding that the spirit leave her body. After many hours and attempts, the girl was able to describe Father Five in the most demonic voice she had ever heard. "I am Lucifer, king of the underworld. I have ruled this earth before, and I will rule it again." The girl apparently passed out. A few minutes later, she woke up with black mud and what looked like grasshoppers or insects, and then she recovered. Now, when my friend and I heard this story, we looked at each other and honestly couldn't help but scream. Father Feeve looked at us blankly, let stop laughing, then stood up and pulled up his shirt to reveal 4 long claw marks like scars all over his stomach. Now, I don't know if this story is completely fictional, I do know that. But I do know 2 things. That Father Five believed his story was true, and that much was clear. The second is that I will never forget this story for the rest of my life. When I was a teenager in the 90s, I worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. I usually worked the closing shift on Fridays and Saturdays. There was a grumpy old man who often came in to buy a few beers. For some reason, he was obsessed with Notre Dame and claimed to be able to predict the future and know when the world would end. Usually, I just ignored it. One night, when I heard him talking to the cashier in a few lines, I smiled to myself and said, "What a job!" I don't know how it happened, but suddenly this man was standing in front of me. He just told me, "You're going to die in a car crash tonight," then turned and walked out of the store. I don't know how he said it, but it set me free. I called my crying mom and she offered to pick me up and take me home after her shift. He said he was a crazy guy and didn't think about it. But after that, I didn't see the guy come in again. Of course, I didn't die in a car crash that night. But since then, I have had 7 car accidents. None of them made me, mind you, but the worst was in my 20s. I was cut off by a drunk driver. The car flew up and down several times. Unfortunately, my friend died, and I had to be pulled out of the car with some of the jaws of life. I remember the paramedics pulling me out of the car. I was surrounded by broken glass and so much blood that I really thought I was going to die. In fact, I almost died. When my mother called, she thought I was dead, and it was a miracle that I survived with only minor injuries. But that guy's words, they still haunt me. I mean, it's a coincidence. I've been in a lot of accidents since this guy said that. My mother's colleague lives alone. No partner, no parents, and no children. Just a dog to keep him company. But every summer, on weekends, he invites his relatives, including his sister's children, to spend the evening with him. They watch movies, play games, and eat candy. Children love it. Since he lives alone, he has only one room. When she sleeps with her relatives, she lets the children sleep in that bedroom and she sleeps on the couch downstairs. Last summer, he arranged a regular sleepover with his relatives. It was so much fun that he put the kids to sleep in his room. Tired but satisfied, he plopped down on his couch and soon fell asleep. Around 3 in the morning, his dog barks restlessly. This was unusual because his dog never barked at night. Still half asleep, he got up from his couch and went over to his dog to see what was going on. He bends down to pet his dog and says, "Hey, what's up, buddy?" And as he says this, he hears someone behind him in the darkness reply, "I don't know either." She started screaming and immediately ran upstairs, locked herself and the children in the bedroom and called the police. In the end, he turned out to be a drunkard who entered the wrong house. But man, If that happened to me, I would be horrified. That was 5 or 6 years ago. So I took the bus home, then got off as usual, and then took the route I always take to get home. It was evening. I passed a man. He looked at me and had some kind of angry expression on his face, as if I was a familiar person, as if he knew me from somewhere, and I did something wrong to him. I didn't think too much of it, and carried on normally. I used to drink to look behind me. The man continued, but at a slower pace. Then he passed me, and after a few seconds I looked back again, and he looked over his shoulder. I started feeling weird and got goosebumps all over my body and started walking fast. Finally, he turned and followed me. I tried not to show fear, and I walked a little faster, maybe after a few meters, because there was a corner, and when I passed the corner, I ran as fast as I could. At some point, I stopped running and thought I had lost this guy and thought it was some weirdo drunk. Suddenly, I was stopped by a man who looked familiar. He had shorter hair and a beard and asked me if I had any euros. I turned him down and said I didn't have any money with me, which was a little weird. At that time, I was never approached, especially in the evening. Someone would ask me for money. The man wouldn't let him go, and he acted like maybe someone told me to stop or something. Anyway, keep the person me in one spot for as long as possible. While she was still talking to me and saying she was really hungry, I continued walking and said I was sorry, and I didn't have any money. And then, to his surprise, he suddenly fell. I walked a few meters, and then fell back and saw what the guy was doing, and asked me for €1. I saw the first person again, and my heart skipped a beat. I quickly moved on, trying to turn around to lose him. I didn't want to let him know that I was afraid of him, so I didn't run again. As I was hurrying, I texted my parents and siblings on WhatsApp that they would open the door before they arrived. I wasn't far enough to open the door for them, and this crazy guy with a long beard wouldn't leave me alone and seemed to follow me. This man, whoever he was, didn't seem to let me go either. Finally, I was almost home and the man was still behind me. Now, before you get to my house, you have to go through a carport. So I was in the carport, and there was this corner, and I looked back before I came around the corner, and this man was maybe 15 to 20 feet away from me. Then as I rounded the corner, I ran faster with all the adrenaline my body was now pumping towards my house. I did it, hoping he wouldn't be able to tell which house I lived in. When I got home, I tried to stay calm. I didn't want my parents and siblings to leave. Anyway, we had a lot of problems, like personal stuff and financial stuff, but they knew something was wrong because my face was pink, and I swear if you pay enough attention, he could see my heart beating through my t-shirt. I was afraid. Over the next few days, our doorbell rings at odd times. At one point, my father came down the stairs to open the door, and I immediately came down the stairs and told him not to open the door. I explained to him that there was some weirdo around the village trying to sell things for TV, so he kept the door closed. At that time, and I still do, I believe that the person who rang the bell at that time was the same guy who walked past me on his way home that day. He was trying to find out what house I lived in, I think. I live in a block of flats in the neighborhood, and I'm glad that my parents still believe in me and don't ask any more questions. I also had a few neighbors that I got to know very well, and sometimes we talked about life and things. They also told me what happened to us. Someone would call at his house at very odd times, and I was shocked. But I tried not to go and say, "Wow, that's crazy." They also cannot understand who a person is. As they say, a normal person never opens the door, I agreed, so they never got a good look at the person. For a second, I wanted to tell them about meeting that creepy guy, but at the same time I was very insecure at that age and didn't want people close to me to think I was someone, a weirdo or something. I guess one question I've always asked myself, though, is what would happen if someone saw what house I was in? What would he do to me and maybe my family? I'm still thinking about it. Luckily, the call was only every day, only for a week, and then it finally stopped. Also, the ringing sound of the man was really weird. It was like a ring, then a pause for 2 seconds, and the same way 4 times. And this always happened. So whoever rang our doorbell in the evening was definitely the same person. I sometimes wonder if maybe she knew someone from something or something and thought it was the person. For example, like a guy who cheated on his wife about something. I didn't look at him aggressively. How a reasonable person could get mad at something like simple eye contact, and 2 or 3 seconds of eye contact is a bit beyond me. Anyway, I don't know exactly what it was, but I do know that it felt like something bad was going on, and I had a feeling that maybe he was trying to steal from me. So my grandmother, she ran into Ted Bundy when she was a teenager. My grandmother grew up in Utah, near Utah State University, or USU. I don't know everything about the encounter because my sister told me the story from my grandmother. But here's what happened. When my grandmother grew up, she is now 66 years old. His parents were very religious, but not too strict compared to most parents today. He has always loved the outdoors and often skipped school after returning home after sunset. One night he was in the park and it was getting dark and cloudy. He was a little late to start home, but he got a little carried away, I think, and he was probably 16, 18 years old at the time. A man had been watching him from his car for a while, but he didn't think anything of it. She called him and asked him if he wanted a house sit, but she felt uncomfortable about this guy, so she politely declined. He tried to convince her to just get in the car. He was very uncomfortable and he was alone. He was about to get into the car too, but then he noticed that the passenger door handle was missing. He was really scared then. She said she had to go. Her parents must be worried. He quickly ran home and the incident always haunted him. He stayed out until sunset and returned home an hour before dark. He never went to parks and playgrounds. A few years later, she heard about him and was horrified. If he had gotten into the car, his whole life could have changed. I never knew this growing up when I was around my grandmother. We would go to a nearby park, but he always insisted on returning an hour before sunset. I always thought it was weird for him, but it wasn't until recently that I realized why. Even now, in her old age, she can't go to parks or playgrounds alone and has to keep an eye on the children all the time. I've always been into true crime and stuff, but I never knew that my grandmother could be a great different statistic. To give you some context, in 2021, I got my first job as an order taker for a food processing company. Being a very social person, I managed to work a small night shift with my boss, talking from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's also funny because there's nothing good about order picking when you compare it to anything else. But for me, it was honest heaven. I could work by myself without interacting with other people, and that was fine with me. One evening, my father dropped me off at 9 p.m. in front of the company. He couldn't pick me up later because he was too tired to drive at night. So I sit on the ground by the building and start lighting a cigarette and hang on my phone. A few minutes later, a well-dressed and stone-carrying man emerges from the darkness. He walks over to sit next to me. At the time, I thought he looked like a normal employee, so I thought he must have forgotten the file or returned it. But strangely, the building was still open, so anyone could have gone in to get their papers if they wanted to. Remembering this, I was a bit scared and wondered what this man wanted and why he was sitting so close to me. Being paranoid by nature, I imagined all sorts of creepy things for him to attack me with. Fortunately, he did no such thing. He just sat there and didn't move an inch. In fact, he seemed to have turned into a statue. I mean, this guy was absolutely still, didn't move an inch, didn't even blink. After a few minutes of silence, I pressed and he did nothing. It was 9:50 p.m., so I entered the building and the man did the same. I was even more worried now, but then I remembered that the building had security cameras. It calmed me down a bit. I mean, why would he attack me in a building with cameras outside? I headed to the rooms to change into the pre-made clothes and saw another room of his that led to the offices. This convinced me once again that it seemed to confirm my theory. During my evening work, I thought about this man and couldn't stop wondering why he was waiting on the floor with me. One of the worst scenarios I could think of was that he probably thought the door was locked and I was waiting to be let in, and instinctively he waited with me without saying anything. I was alone in my area for most of the shift and continued to work until at one point I heard someone cough and turn around. The man immediately looked straight at me and stood like an arrow. When I saw him looking at me, I jumped up and said, "Can I help you?" But he didn't say anything and just stared at me blankly. After about 2 minutes, which seemed like hours, he finally walked over to me. My instincts screamed at me to run away from this guy, but I couldn't. To my surprise, It was less than 2 meters. He put his hand in his pocket. At this point, I was thinking of pulling out a knife or something to hit me with, but instead he pulled out a pack of cigarettes, still unsealed, handed it to me and left. It was the same brand I used to smoke, but it wasn't for me because I buy my packs of cigarettes individually. When I'm empty, I buy another one, but I never buy multiple packs at the same time. Plus, he never found out what brand it was because I didn't put the package in front of him. I never saw him again after that. I moved to another area that evening to talk to other colleagues, but they were skeptical of my story. I also tried to tell my superiors, but they didn't believe me either, because you need an access card to enter the building, and they said that if this stranger was able to get in, he probably had one. The problem was, I was the one who opened the door, and it was just before it closed. Nevertheless, I continued to work there until the end of the contract. But I don't know who this man is or what he wants from me. Why did he sit next to me that night? Why did he follow me? Why did he stare at me for so long without saying a word? Why did he give me an unopened pack of cigarettes? Why did he get up and leave like that? It's all really confusing, but I don't know, some of it. Something tells me something is wrong about this situation. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I have often thought about it, and now I know without a doubt that my patient and I were the victims of a predator. I work for my state and work with people with substance abuse, mental illness, and mild developmental delays. With developmental delays, my role is more like a low-level social worker, I think. One thing to check is whether the participant can meet the individual goals set for the year, like the IEP in public schools. One of my patients has to walk at least a mile 3 times a week. When I came to his house, walking or hiking was necessary to reach him, so he took us both for a walk and a little camping nearby. He and I are really the same age, we're in our 40s. As we followed the trail, we reached an even more distinct point. We didn't walk the trail along the neighboring pond with the crowds, though we were on a trail that led us through the forest in the cotton fields. He and I were walking, and when he suddenly stopped walking, I looked at him, and as he said, I had a bad feeling and also felt like someone or something was watching us. Because of his developmental delays, I was more concerned about his well-being than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't really feel any fear, I guess. I defended him. I looked back because I heard the rustling of leaves, and a young man in his 30s suddenly comes out of the forest, and he slowly walks towards us. There was no one else for this guy to climb out of the magical forest and onto us, and I knew he didn't know what he wanted. I told him to keep walking, and I nodded. I don't even know why I did it, but I turned around completely, stopped, and looked straight at him. I watched. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything, but after closing his eyes, he seemed to know I was coming back here now, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I looked at him, and then started walking towards my patient, who realized that it was my eyes. Then on my way back, I looked back to see my patient, and he quickly disappeared as he dutifully walked back into the woods. Now, if he wanted to follow this trail of nature, why did he stop as soon as he turned around? Why doesn't he keep walking and pass us? This guy is clearly waiting and waiting for the woman, maybe the women, to come down the isolated road. When he came out of the forest, it was clear to me that I should not hide and seek now. I will forever believe that my patient's bad feelings and care for me will save one person, or maybe both of us, from whatever that person is planning. I recently had my memory reset and had to double-check with my mom to make sure, and she unfortunately confirmed it was true. It was pushed by someone on the street outside my office, through a very small window. They were harmless, but the sight of their faces suddenly reminded me of a long-forgotten memory of the first house I lived in as a child. When I was 6 years old, we moved out of this house. There was a fence when I started walking, but my parents always wouldn't let me, so we moved away. I used to resent him, but now I think I understand why. Apparently, our neighbor a few doors down was a registered sex offender. When she moved, she had to notify her neighbors through her social worker. He has a habit of putting things around. For example, he once ran across the street and left a human-sized footprint on our neighbor's garage door. She also shivered and entered the neighbor's back door, asked to hold it. She kicked him out and called the police when she realized he also had an erection. After my mother confirmed my story, I checked her name and found more of this. I also found his Facebook page, which had a photo of him on it, and I stamped the suspicion I had on it. His face was clear as day, I remember. Even seeing it on screen immediately made me sad. My memory tells me that I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and I felt like something was watching me. It was midday, and I looked out the front windows to see a man with his face and hands pressed against the glass. This is the person I saw on the Facebook page. He was smiling at me with big eyes and an even scarier smile. I remember being held in someone's arms and taken to another room, and my mother confirmed that it would be my grandmother who was raising me at the time. I remember that, and I'll never forget that face, and I'm glad we moved. This is a story about my mother's house. She and my stepfather, we'll call him P, have been married for about 15 years. P is the 5th generation in his family, living in a small rural town on an inherited 150-acre estate. He inherited a farmhouse so old it was deemed uninhabitable, so they tore it down, buried most of it, and put a modular home on the property. Before P married my mother, he lived with his ex-wife on an old farm. Her name was B. B thought that the property and the house were very offensive, and she did not agree. They decided to bring a psychic to investigate, and he said there were many spirits, but they were all good. Shortly after this visit, around 3 a.m., P was awakened by a light outside his bedroom window. Living in one place, there was really no reason for the light to be on like that. He looked out the window and apparently saw a little girl standing there. B woke up and looked out the window and saw him too. But then he started to smell smoke. They went downstairs to find the kitchen on fire. All but the Christmas wax figures of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph in this kitchen were burned. P keeps them in a shadow box in the kitchen, but it is now, they are lucky they didn't lose the whole house. Anyway, fast forward to a long time. My mom and P are married and living happily, and I've been living under the same roof since I was a teenager. To be honest, I loved living there. There were a lot of properties to check out, but I remember this one part in the woods always gave me the creeps and made me very uncomfortable with bad vibes. So one night I fell asleep, and I remember having a very strange dream. In my dream, it was very clear, the crack of dawn. I get up and walk out my back door, and the sky is dark, dark blue-gray, and the air feels cold on my skin. A little girl, no older than 7, walks out of the woods into the yard and onto the back deck. He had pale skin, light hair, and light-colored clothing. He looks at me and smiles. I think about how sweet, warm, and friendly she is. She doesn't say anything, but she reaches out and motions for me to come with her, so I take hers. We walk and walk for what seems like forever. On the way, we pass many other people, but they don't bother anyone. They just watch us. The little girl took me to a place in the woods that always made me uncomfortable. Suddenly, the weather turned from summer to winter, from morning to evening, and it was cold. Suddenly, I am amazed at how beautiful the scene is, but then I realize that the little girl is not holding my hand. I look around and see his body lying limp and lifeless. His skin turned blue and curled up like a ball. I cried at the top of my lungs, but no one heard me and no one came. Then I woke up, and the dream was very disturbing, and it made my parents feel bad too. I thought I should do a little research. I learned about 50 years ago that a young woman disappeared about a mile down the road, but no one knew where she had gone. I asked P, because he has lived this way all his life and he confirmed it. So I never had an awkward conversation with my parents. We lived in a small town where everyone liked and trusted me. From the age of 6, I was taught to ride public transport alone or with my younger brother. I never thought that an adult would hurt a child, to be honest, except for my grandmother for some reason. Being young and totally dumb, right? Well, when I was 11 years old, I was walking alone on the beach and a middle-aged man came up to me and asked me to take a picture. I smiled and he took a picture with his digital camera. He then asked me to take my shirt off because we were at the beach, and I would look better in the photo without it. At that point, I thought I should ask and smiled again at the photo. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I wasn't scared. He tried to talk and asked me what I should do. I told him I liked to play video games. He told me he had a PlayStation in his room and invited me to play video games. Now, if the sun hadn't set, I'd honestly say yes. Instead, I said that I should go back to my family's house because I was late. He grabbed my shoulder and beckoned me to come with him. I told him I couldn't go again, and he hugged me and said goodbye. I thought it was a really weird meeting all these years, part hug and all, because I've never been much of a physical touch person and I really like personal space. In the end, I suppressed it and never told anyone about it. Even years later, in my deep shower thoughts, I suddenly realized how confusing it really is. So, a series of events began to happen to me when I was very young, around 8 or 9 years old. I admit there is a chance the series won't connect, but I think they're all pretty well connected to one broken person. The first thing that happened was that the phone started ringing almost every night between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. Being a light sleeper, it kept waking me up. My parents never seemed to worry about it. They probably both got drunk almost overnight and passed out anyway. But even if I complained, they would reply that it was a wrong number or something along those lines. It gave me a bad feeling every night, hearing the loud ringing of the phone in the kitchen. So one night, out of curiosity and desperation, when this phone rang, I decided to answer it. I heard distant music in the background as well as heavy breathing. Now, being older, I can honestly say it sounded like someone sitting at a bar, maybe. Eventually, my parents changed the number, but a few months after my parents changed it, I woke up again, but with a different voice. There's something eerie about hearing noises at night in a detached country house. Every little sound is heard, different sounds are heard, and you can feel it. So it really upset me when I heard our car slowing down on the road in front of our house. I remember hearing the tires screeching on the gravel in the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the wooden square clock in my bedroom. It was 2:15 in the morning. For reasons I couldn't explain, I got out of bed, went into the living room, and looked out the windows hanging over the car. I stood away from the window so he wouldn't see me there, and I looked at him through the curtains. A man in a black Buick Sentry drove up to my house. I couldn't make out his face. I noticed that he had dark hair with a bob cut style. If I had to guess now, it was probably in the mid-30s. He just sat there. He looked at my house in a trance-like state. I don't remember him moving much. I waited to see what he would do. I was filled with fear. He just sat there for about 15 minutes. Then he very slowly backs away and walks away. He looked at the house as he drove, but I'll never forget it. So maybe it was the wrong house. Maybe he was drunk. Who knows? But then, I think it came back. It was Sunday evening, and I was playing in the front yard with my siblings. I still remember that horrible feeling when I had to go back to school the next day. At some point, the car pulls up and stops in front of a mailbox in the driveway. Our house was on a small hill with a back road behind it. The mailbox was on the way, and we playfully stopped and looked curiously. We knew it was Sunday, and still the mail didn't come. Also, this is no ordinary mail car. This man just sat there looking at us. At one point, he took his hand out of the window and pretended to put something in the mailbox. Then he walked about 50 yards down the road and just stopped and sat down. So my brothers told me to go and check the mailbox. I don't know why they told me. Maybe because I'm the youngest, but I walked down the small hill and opened the mailbox, but there was nothing there. But suddenly, I hear the screeching of tires and the car goes backwards. I screamed and we all ran into the house. Whoever they were gone very quickly. We told our parents and they thought they were confused and downplayed the situation. That night, as I lay in bed, the person in my head was the same person who came that night. It was the same car that I remember with a bang. That's when the frustration started to set in. A year later, one day at school, I overheard the teachers telling the kids to stay away from the black Buick. They said a man appeared to be trying to steal children from the mailbox after getting off the bus. Fortunately, a few years later, when my parents divorced, I moved out of the city. But it bothers me a little in my dreams. I have never heard of this man. I don't know if a child is missing or something, and I hope not. My family and I moved to this house when I was 10 years old. The first night we were there was constant tapping on the walls in one of the back bedrooms. Mom put it on the pipes because it was an old house, but she didn't hear anything, so she tried to help us not to be afraid. I lived there for 8 years, and during that time, the house was always bad. There would be nights when I would be in bed and never make it upstairs, when I heard the downstairs door open and footsteps on the stairs. At one point I heard the door open, so I pretended to be asleep because I had school the next day and I was past my bedtime. I waited a few minutes and thought it was strange that my parents had not reached the top step. So I got out of bed and I looked down the stairs, but no one was there. Not only that, the front bedroom door was still closed and I could hear the TV and my parents talking. I don't know how I went to sleep that night, but somehow I did. The next time there was anything after that was a night later, I think around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was in bed reading this book I got from the school library, and I turned to face the hallway and saw something out of the corner of my eye that made me look. It came from my brother's room, and was a dark figure like a shadow. There was a rough outline of the man, but it was a little rougher to look at. He moved down the hall to my mother's room. I noticed that the hair on the back of my neck is gone. I was scared. So scared I couldn't check. So I was late. My eyes were tired, and I said there was really nothing there. I stared at the wall, and eventually I fell asleep. I don't know if he moved into my room after that, but I was too scared to look at him. Anyway, I tried to put it out of my head after that and didn't tell anyone about it. A few months later, I was downstairs with my mother. We had a room leading into the kitchen, and to the right was the bathroom. My mother used to do her hair here after a bath. The mirror she faced reflected the kitchen and bathroom door. He asked, "Did you see that? A dark figure walking through the mirror." I was a little taken aback by this, and he explained that it was moving fast and he just grabbed it, but he described it as something I saw upstairs. But I knew I didn't tell him. How could he know? Anyway, after a few months, I could watch my brothers at night. Everyone was in bed when my sister heard footsteps coming down the stairs and woke me up saying she was scared. I managed to calm him down, but I know I've heard it once before. Now, the layout of the top floor is that you would go up the stairs and then turn around, and there would be 3 more to get to the landing where the square was. Then, if you move forward, the bedroom would also be on both sides. The house next to us, it mirrored this, so you can see out the window on the stairs to the next door landing, upstairs and vice versa. It was Boxing Day, and I was in the city center with my family when my neighbor called. He asked if I was home, and I replied that no one was. He then told me that he was standing by the upstairs window looking into my room and could see a shadow sitting on his back on the floor. I didn't say anything to him, but he described what I saw. Then, before we left, my mother cleaned out this closet in her bedroom by hand. He had cleaned it many times before, but this time he found this random picture of ballerinas, and because of it, for Patricia, 1959. But it was really weird because, like I said, he cleaned it from top to bottom so many times and it just sat there like this picture came out by accident. To this day, I don't know what happened in that house, but I'm sure there was something. This happened to me in high school. I mean, sometime like 2014 to 2016. I think about it often and have told the story to others many times, and every time I do, I still feel uncomfortable. So in this introduction, people close to me die tragically. My brother is special before this event. I had 2 other meetings at the same time. Now, I'm not too heavy of a sleeper, but I smoked a lot of green during the day, if you know what I mean, and it's a good part of it. I lived with my grandparents. They slept across the hall. I had my own room. As far back as I can remember, I always slept on the side of the bed closest to the bedroom door. And one night, I somehow woke up in the middle of the night. It seemed like a dream, but I remember looking hard and seeing a figure standing there. I had no idea. I thought it was my sister who lived down the street at my mother's house, mind you. I didn't hear him say anything, at least I don't think so, but just shake my hand twice. I instinctively moved my body to the other side of the bed to give room to my sister. Only to do so, my eyes widened in horror. I realized that someone sleeping next to me was not my sister, and could not be anyone else. I turned and looked. The blankets had been moved, but no one was there. I will never forget the sheer terror I felt in that moment. So before I start this, I told my husband about the possibility of a carbon dioxide leak, but he told me he had a detector and the batteries were fine. He also said that there is no gas line to our house. Nothing uses gas like our generator, which runs for months. Our garage became a storage room with no cars in it. In less than 6 months, we've gone through everything possible because we wanted to deny my baby and the constant coldness we had. My spouse is an electrician and has to make sure all buildings are up to code, so monoxide detectors are usually mandatory and must be checked frequently for operation. And anyway, I tried to think of all the possibilities for all of this. And so it happened. After a while, my husband came home from work, as usual. But today was a training day, so I didn't think too much of it. There was nothing unusual about our interactions. He says hello, comes over and kisses me, and asks about my day. I ask about her, and then she goes to the bathroom to change, etc. Then he started playing the newly released Diablo game. I went into another room and scrolled through social media for a while and saw that he was quiet, so I called him. The answer is no. I say other times the answer is no. I think maybe he fell asleep in a beanbag or something, so I go to check it and it's not there. The TV is off. Weird. He usually asks me to work in the garage or yard. It doesn't come back, not in any of the rooms, not in the garage, not in the front yard. I couldn't find it anywhere. I look ahead and see that his work van has also left. Now I'm really confused. Did he leave the house without kissing me? It never happened all these years. I immediately call her phone and it goes to voicemail. He texts back and asks if I'm okay. Am I okay? Where did you go? I say. She reports and says she can't talk right now because she's still in CPR training. I ask him why he didn't say goodbye, and then he asks me what I was talking about, because he kissed me when he left this morning. He told me that he hasn't taken a day off work yet. Okay, now I'm losing my mind about it. I'm like, I've had a full conversation with you. A hug, you went to turn. What do you mean you're not home? So he must be confused or something because he wasn't.